Jaguars are powerful, lethal animals that stand out among other carnivorous beasts. As lethal as lions and tigers, these cats can take down hefty prey with their incredible strength and agility. Tension rose as a dog unintentionally wandered into a jaguar's home. Fearing the worst, no one imagined what happened next. The unexpected turn of events left everyone shocked. Jack was a small and friendly dog that lived with his owner Simon on a wildlife reserve in Africa. He loved to go for walks, play games, and sit in the warm sun, just soaking up the rays and napping surrounded by nature. The wildlife reserve was generally quiet, and there was a wide open space around the house where the dog could run and play. It was very rare that any of the wild animals would make their way anywhere near the house, so Simon was happy to let Jack roam free. There was one time when Jack encountered an elephant. The large animal came lumbering out of the trees and took Jack by surprise. The little dog yelped in shock and ran as fast as he could back to the safety of Simon in the house. But as soon as he realized the elephant was no danger to him, he wanted to go back out and play with it. Simon, on the other hand, was not so keen with letting Jack play with such a large animal. Elephants can weigh many tons, and if that giant accidentally stepped on the small dog, then that would spell disaster. But that was just an example of how sociable and fearless Jack was. He loved to meet other animals, play with them, and make new friends. Simon often felt bad because while there were plenty of animals out there in the wildlife reserve, there weren't many other dogs for Jack to run and play with. He did his best to try and keep his dog entertained and happy. But every now and again, he would feel a pang of guilt and even sadness that Jack had no proper animal friends. One day, Simon received phone calls from several other rangers that worked at the wildlife reserve, telling him to be cautious and vigilant because a jaguar had been spotted nearby. Now, Simon was never afraid of animals being near his property. After all, that's why he had become a ranger. But having a vicious and extremely dangerous carnivorous predator stalking the trees not too far from his home sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't unheard of for these animals to attack pets, and even people that strayed too close. Luckily, no one had been killed or injured by jaguars on the wildlife reserve yet, but still, he didn't want to test his lucky star. So just to be safe, Simon kept Jack in sight for several days. The little dog was obviously frustrated and wanted to be out in the open air, but Simon didn't want to tempt the jaguar to come any closer. The only time Jack was allowed outside was when Simon was with him, and even then he was on a very short leash. One morning, Simon awoke at his usual time and sat up in bed. Yawning, he rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and stood up, heading to the kitchen to make a coffee and find something to eat for breakfast. But there was something wrong. Something was missing. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, and it wasn't until he was pouring his coffee that he realized Jack wasn't in his bed. The dog was usually happened to wake at the same time as him, but he always stayed in his bed for a little while Simon made his breakfast. But there was no sign of Jack. Simon reached down to feel the bed and noticed it was cold. Clearly, the dog had not been laid there in quite some time. He shouted Jack's name. The dog would usually come scampering into the room, but there was nothing, not a sight nor sound of the little dog. Simon grew concerned and ran from room to room looking for his beloved dog, but Jack couldn't be found anywhere. What he did discover, though, was that the bathroom door was slightly ajar, as was a window. There was more than enough room for the dog to get through and outside. Simon's eyes went wide at the realization, and he ran to his front room to look out of the window. There he saw something that made his heart skip a beat and his blood ran cold. Jack was on the floor, and a giant jaguar was pouncing on him and seemingly tormenting the poor little pet. The dog was yelping on the floor, his little legs flailing as the jaguar would pounce, then run a short way away before turning around and doing it again. Over and over it went. Simon had heard stories of how jaguars would torment and play with their prey before killing them. It was a sadistic way to kill defenseless animals, but it's just the way jaguars and other big cats, such as lions and tigers, did things. It was nature. But that still didn't change the fact that Simon needed to save his poor dog. He would hate to see his beloved pet die this way. The jaguar's razor-like claws and sharp, pointy teeth could easily finish off Jack. Simon grabbed his gun and he was ready to shoot the jaguar to stop the attack when something made him stop in his tracks, something that he did not expect to see. Jack's tail was wagging as if he was enjoying himself, and strangely, the little dog looked uninjured. In fact, he seemed as if he were having the time of his life. Simon slowly laid down his gun and continued watching through the window, suddenly interested in what was going on. The Jaguar was pouncing onto Jack, but not aggressively. There were no claws involved, nor was it baring its teeth. It was simply tapping at the dog before running away. Suddenly, Jack leaped up and ran at the Jaguar, who flopped down onto its back and rolled around as the dog climbed on it and playfully fought with it. They were actually playing. It was a game. Simon was so shocked that he let out a little laugh. The sight of a small dog like Jack wrestling playfully with a huge Jaguar was staggering. After an hour, the Jaguars seemed to have grown tired and started heading back off into the trees. Simon opened the door slightly and called Jack back to him. The dog happily trotted towards the house and in through the door. Simon picked him up and checked him all over, but found not a single cut or scratch on him. He must have been playing with a predator for well over an hour, but he had sustained not a single injury. Later that day, Jack was once again begging to go outside. Peeking from the door, Simon noticed the Jaguar lay casually at the end of the garden as if it were waiting for a play date with the dog. Again, Jack slipped through the door and the two animals played and rolled around and had a lot of fun. It was a most unlikely friendship, but a beautiful one too. And for the next few years, the Jaguar would keep coming back to see Jack. They'd formed a strong connection and the two became the best of friends. They played, rolled around, and even just sat in the sun together with Jack laying against the giant Jaguar. Unfortunately, though things couldn't stay the same forever, Jack's owner, Simon, had to move several hours away for work, and Jack would have to go with him. This would separate Jack and the Jaguar forever. Simon understood that his dog, despite being small, was a very emotionally driven animal. It would undoubtedly miss its unlikely friend, and he wouldn't understand why they had to leave. So, as the sun set over the reserve on the final day, Simon released Jack to go and play with the Jaguar. One last time the pair ran, rolled around, and groomed each other until the sun had disappeared over the horizon, at which point Simon called Jack back to him. Then they packed their final few things and they left the wildlife reserve forever. It truly is a sad and downbeat ending to the story, but we think that it shows that even the most unlikely of animals can become friends and have a kinship and a closeness. And while it seemed at first like they would never get along, and as if things would inevitably end in disaster, a strong and enduring friendship would blossom. So, now it's over to you. What did you think of this incredible story? How would you have reacted if a Jaguar befriended your dog? Have you ever heard of two animals having such an unlikely friendship? As always, we love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below.